Hey everybody, this is Bowen, and you are listening to the very first episode of Brainpower. This is a podcast that I'm going to be hosting and publishing in order to document the acceleration of the decentralized artificial intelligence, or DAI, tech space, more specifically within the cryptocurrency world, and even more specifically than that, within the Morpheus network ecosystem primarily. Morpheus is a project that I am an active community member and contributor to. I maintain the integrations repo within the GitHub and also am very active on the official Discord channel and the Twitter Spaces and many other social platforms within the Morpheus network ecosystem. I am just one of many active contributors, and to be totally honest, there are individuals involved in this project whose both abilities and intellect extend far beyond my own. That being said, doing things like podcasting and other social layer aspects of project building are something that I have experience with. And so this is, an undertaking I decided to take on. Also, I just enjoy doing it. And so hopefully I can create some interesting content that is both insightful and approachable for individuals. I think with this first episode, a good first step will be just describing who I am and how I got involved in Morpheus, kind of what my crypto and decentralized AI journey has been thus far, which really starts back around the 2016-2017 timeframe, at which time I was attending Cornell University. I was not a technical major. I was studying industrial and labor relations, which is the degree that I finished, which is essentially Cornell's version of a pre-law degree. A ton of people from that program go on to law school. This is something I did not end up doing, and I'll get into that in a little bit. But during my time there, I first heard about blockchain and actually Ethereum even before I had heard about Bitcoin through just people I was going to school with. And also Cornell, to my knowledge, was one of the first schools to have what was then called Cornell Blockchain, which was an after-school group program basically that would meet up to discuss the development in the cryptocurrency and blockchain space. One little crazy tidbit was that at the time, the professor who was heading the group was Professor Amin Gunsur, who went on to found Avalanche. So, I always look back on that as myself being very much a normie at the time, not understanding the level of, intellect and development happening right in front of my eyes. And it was such an opportunity where, I really could have taken advantage of being in the right place at the right time. And in some ways I did, but certainly not to the level I could have, which is just kind of funny to look back on now, just having not really known what I could be and ultimately was getting myself into with this entire space. As I graduated from college and the 2017 bull market really took off, we saw Bitcoin cross 20,000 for the first time. We saw Ethereum reach a high of, I believe it was something like $1,482. We saw countless ICOs and different decentralized applications start to form. Some of them are still around today. Things like Aave, Compound, Augur was a huge one at the time, which I'll also discuss in a moment. And following finishing school, I had basically round tripped that whole cycle. I did the thing that I think pretty much all crypto people do when they first enter this space and become really obsessed with the space. And I spent all of my free time that I could just consuming information, whether it be on Twitter, through other podcasts, through just reading people's blog posts, forums, and just trying to learn as much as I could about the space. And of course, as things really started to pop off, I had no experience in, the cyclical nature of cryptocurrency, and I round tripped every single dollar that I put into the market, rode it all the way up, all the way back down. I will say I never sold anything through that whole market cycle, which is, I guess, something to hang your hat on nowadays, but at the time, was obviously a little bit foolish. But as I graduated school, I ended up taking a job at a asset manager in New York that focused on leveraged debt, basically corporate debt funds. And I continued to keep up with my love of the cryptocurrency space and following along with projects. One of the ones I was following very closely at the time was Augur, which was kind of ahead of its time. It was really similar to what they were trying to do is very similar to what Polymarket has done today. Polymarket has found such an amazing product market fit for crypto and retail application users, basically. And Augur was trying to do the same thing. They were trying to create a decentralized prediction market where essentially anybody could pose any market and add liquidity. And as long as there were people willing to take both sides, you'd have a market to trade in. My genius idea at the time was trying to launch a fund that effectively was a prediction market fund. Did this under the name of New Thesis Group with a friend of mine. It never really went anywhere, largely because Augur did not pick up too much traction as far as available markets and liquidity goes. To be honest, I think they were just too far ahead of their time. Polymarket has now really captured that, and a couple other prediction market platforms have as well. But throughout that whole next bear market, I just continued to follow the development of the space, sitting in on calls for things like MakerDAO and other dApps and projects that were really starting to develop and never stopped building during the whole bear market. Coming into the bull run between 2020 and 2022, I was full-fledged back in the space. By this point, I had actually moved on to a different asset manager in the middle market space and had moved to Texas. Still, though, was just obsessed with crypto and wanted to be in the space as much as possible. And so I explored a couple other avenues, one of which was a business that I had started called Unchartered Inc., which was essentially trying to be a staking as a service provider. Explored that space for a while, ultimately decided that it wasn't the right time for me to launch that business venture, and tons of other staking as a service businesses have popped up since, which have been very successful. For the record, I still think it's a great business model, and this was kind of right around the time of the Ethereum merge really looking like it was going to take form. Essentially round-tripped that whole market as well. I continued to invest in projects and teams that I saw building some really great stuff, and just never really pulled anything out of the market. I don't know. I don't mean to dive so into the finance aspect, because I really do want this show to be focused on decentralized AI, and I will get to that, I promise. But I just want to give you a little bit of background for people who maybe are listening to this who have invested in multiple cycles, or maybe even this is your first cycle, and kind of what to expect. And if you have round-tripped, a market cycle before, you are not alone. I can certainly tell you that just from my own experience and some of my friends' experience. Anyway, continued very active in the space, exploring those different staking opportunities and a potential staking as a service business during the 2020 to 2022 market cycle. At the end of that cycle, when things really started to hit the fan and a lot of people once again looked like they were giving up on the cryptocurrency space, this is around events like the Lunaterra collapse and the FTX collapse and Celsius and many of these other businesses and projects that ultimately went under and kind of set up the market positioning for the cycle that we are now experiencing a couple years later. Right around that time is when I started noticing AI apps and AI products really coming to market. Of course, relative to people who've been working on this stuff for decades, of which there are many, even within the Morpheus project, there are many. I was very late to this game, but I've certainly never claimed to be, I guess what I'm trying to say is I very recently was, as I became less of a normie in crypto, I was certainly a normie in AI. And so this was right on the time that I started working with and using some of these applications and things like early GPTs and early large language models that you could interact with. And this brings us to 2023, when the Morpheus white paper was officially published in September of 2023. Fun fact, the white paper was actually published on September 2nd, 2023, which happens to be Keanu Reeves' birthday. A little fun Matrix Easter egg from the three-headed pseudo-anonymous publishers of the white paper, which the white paper itself is something I will dive into on a more technical basis in a later episode. But the white paper goes live and basically people start building right away. Members of the community took notice and decided that this was something that not only should be built, but needed to be built. I really became aware of it around end of January, early February 2024. Right around the time that the capital contract first went live, and I decided to be a capital contributor to the project. And from there, I just fell in love with everything that was going on and the people who were working on it, all things I will, dive into in much greater detail. And that leads me to where we are now. For the past, what has it been, almost a year now, I've been really diving into the community and looking to help in any way that I can develop the actual technology, but also the community and integrations with other protocols, other blockchain projects, businesses, and anybody who can benefit from decentralized AI. And so just a little, background on who I am. Of course, over time, I hope to get to know each other a little bit better. For now, though, I want to cover from my perspective what made me kind of fall in love with this concept and this project in the first place. And it was really a few things. The first is the idea that we need decentralized artificial intelligence. To me, this is so obvious. It is inevitable no matter who ends up building it, which is, I think, the first thing that needs to be understood. In the same way that Bitcoin brought us freedom of money and the transfer and storage of value, and Ethereum and other L1 smart contract platforms brought us essentially freedom of internet, and more specifically internet application. Applications that can be ran anywhere and owned by no one and shut down by no one. We need to have access to information and AI tools within the same capacity. And a lot of people look at it like they look at it out of maybe fear of nation states or governments or centralized businesses saying, no, you can't access XYZ tool. I look at it slightly differently. What I'm most afraid of is a world where those entities say, you must access XYZ tool. And to me, that's something that's a little bit different. I know when people speak about things like freedom of speech, there's topics that get talked about where it's one thing to say you are not allowed to say this thing. It's a whole nother thing to say you must say this thing, right? Do you understand the difference? That's when we start getting into the concept of compelled speech. Not only are you not able to say XYZ thing, but we are now telling you, you must say XYZ thing. And we're seeing this play out a lot in the EU and the UK and some of these other places where people can actually be prosecuted and in some cases imprisoned for speech, not just using the wrong speech, but not using the correct compelled speech. I look at centralized artificial intelligence and centralized information as compelled code. I don't want to just be told you cannot use the code that you want to use. I am equally, if not more, afraid of being told you must use our code. And I think that's an important distinction to make. And that's really the driving factor or the driving force behind my motivation for helping the development of decentralized AI. I want to live in a world where you have the freedom to use these tools in the same capacity that the higher ups or those with more power or influence do. You have the same ability to use the tools that they do to achieve your own positive outcomes. Now, getting into what Morpheus specifically is. Morpheus is a peer-to-peer network for general purpose AI, or put differently, it is a sandbox where compute providers can be connected through a proxy routing system to those with demand for AI inference, whether that be an individual user, a business, an agent, like an actual smart agent who needs compute for it to operate, or anybody who needs inference, and it does so on a decentralized, permissionless basis where the user or agent is able to own their own data as opposed to all of that data being owned by a centralized entity. Also worth noting that the entire project is community driven. The token was a fair launch. There was never a VC dollar. There is no treasury. There is no Morpheus Foundation. I've heard people in the community throw out the phrase, we are all Morpheus, or we are Morpheus, in kind of the same context that one might say we are Satoshi when talking about Bitcoin. And it's very much true. Do you want to be a contributor to Morpheus? Awesome. Come contribute to Morpheus. Do you want to use Morpheus Compute to build your project? Great. Obtain some more tokens and access the decentralized compute providers. Do you want to be a decentralized compute provider? Awesome. Build your hardware and proxy route it using the Morpheus router, and you'll be connected with demand for inference, and you're able to do that. And that ability to access these tools on a decentralized, permissionless basis with no specific owner, no VC, no treasury, no foundation saying what you can and can't do is incredibly valuable. Additionally, I think it's important to note that Morpheus is not a blockchain, which is also something that I like. I think I know there are many, many blockchains out there that do many, many things. Some of them are great. Most of them are redundant and unnecessary, in my opinion. But Morpheus is a protocol that can live on top of any blockchain and, in theory, could be interoperable with any chain or crypto ecosystem that somebody wanted it to be, and basically built a portfolio to integrate with. That's extremely important when we start thinking about things like smart agent building, which is the idea that right now we kind of use a 2.0, let's call it, version of what a quote unquote agent is, which is where we are today. I would say a 1.0 version is me going onto a website with a chat bot and asking it a question or giving it, a prompt and it replying to me, right? We've seen that before. We now have really great versions of that. The 2.0 version of this was kind of this idea that I could take what is effectively a chatbot and give it an API to something like Twitter, give it a prompt and instructions, and it can actually go provide information, essentially autonomously, kind of thinking for itself in one way, shape, or form. The third version of agent, and when I think an agent really becomes a smart agent, is when that agent can not only provide information to a user, but actually execute tasks. So for example, let's say that I have an agent that I want to do a dollar cost averaging trading strategy for me, and I want to give it instructions to do that. A smart agent could take those parameters and actually execute those trades for me on my behalf to fit that strategy without me having to manually instruct it to do so every single time. To me, that's when you really take that next step to kind of agent 3.0 and then agent 4.0, which these are just terms that I'm using. These aren't official terms or anything, but this is just kind of the framework that I'm thinking of it in. The agent kind of 4.0 is really where you can have intent for an outcome, and an agent can use your intent to find the best model, other agent, platform, or whatever it is to execute what you want on its own. So basically, it can learn your intentions to create the outcome for you that you ultimately desire. And that's really looking forward down the line here, but that's kind of what we're looking towards. In the same way that you have a smartphone today and everyone has this magic black box that you can access any information essentially that you're willing to search for, I think going forward, everyone will have their own dedicated smart agent that can execute on all of the different tasks, applications, bits of information, and basically things within the internet that you want to outsource in the way that you want to outsource it. And the ability to do so while owning your own data and have it be permissionless without any type of centralized entity infringing on your ability to use the applications or data or agents or monitoring every single thing you do or surveilling you or selling your information to other businesses, nation states, government agencies, whatever it is, I think is really going to be a fundamental right as that reality becomes the norm for all of us using technology. And I think this is one of those things that sounds a little far-fetched at the moment, but in hindsight is going to be just as obvious as using an application on your phone, which is something that even 20 years ago, people would have had a hard time really understanding that everything that became a website during the dot-com bubble ultimately became an application throughout the 2010s and early 20s and will in the future become a smart agent effectively, or something that plugs into your local smart agent if you're running one on your own device. Morpheus has 4 pillars right now, or essentially ways of being involved. All of this I'm going to dive much deeper into from a technical perspective, but just giving you a little bit of a broader overview. The 4 buckets, if you will, are compute, code, capital, and builders. I'm going to repeat it again. It's compute, code, capital, and builders. And I'm just going to give you a really quick overview on what those buckets are. Compute providers are individuals or businesses or projects that have hardware infrastructure that they want to use to provide inference to the Morpheus network. So maybe they're a miner currently, or they're a business or somebody who has access to a high level of compute hardware, and they're looking for a way to support a decentralized AI ecosystem and get compensated and rewarded for doing so through token emissions from the protocol itself. They can become a compute provider. And again, this is permissionless. Somebody can decide to offer a model to the Morpheus network ecosystem, and they can register themselves as either a node or a subnet to the protocol as a compute provider. And as long as there's demand on the other side, they will receive a pro rata share of the protocol more token emissions for the compute that they provide. And again, I will, in a later episode, do a deeper dive into each of these buckets to give a much more technical look on what that actually means. But from this high level, bird's eye point of view, the way to look at it is you're someone that has hardware resources. You're willing to offer a model. Let's just use, Llama 3 as the example in this case. You're willing to run Llama 3 on your hardware and offer it as a model that on a decentralized basis, users of the Morpheus network can connect to, and you are rewarded in emissions based on the pro rata share of compute that you're providing based on what the demand is for the models. The second bucket is code. These are people who are contributing to the actual code base and development of the Morpheus protocol itself. All of the documents and all of the commits for the Morpheus project are on GitHub. They're publicly available. So if you are a developer and you want to go in and look at the docs and you see something that you can optimize, or maybe you see an integration that you can make. For example, I know that there's individuals right now working on a More token contract that can be deployed on Solana, so that the More token, which currently lives on primarily Arbitrum and Base and Ethereum Layer 1, could also then be deployed on Solana, expanding into the Solana ecosystem. If you saw an opportunity for Morpheus and wanted to either improve on existing code or ship new code, that's something you can be rewarded for from the protocol in protocol emissions. And there's actually an entire section of the protocol emissions carved out for that. The third bucket is capital providers, which was actually the first of these 4 buckets to go live as far as live smart contracts go, and is the one that first drew me in, and is a really interesting thing that Morpheus really created with its More 20 standard and the fair launch mechanism. So as the contract exists currently, you can take Lido staked ETH. So if you have Ethereum and you've staked it to Lido, or you've purchased ST ETH on something like Uniswap, you can take that staked ETH and go ahead and stake it to the Morpheus capital contract. And if you want to check out the website to do this, you can go to earnmore.ai. That is EARNMOR.ai. At earnmore.ai, you can stake your Lido staked ETH to the Morpheus contract. And the really cool mechanism at play here is that when you do this, the yield that your Lido staked ETH is accruing from Lido is actually being kept and directed to the Morpheus protocol, so that the protocol itself has protocol-owned liquidity to create liquidity for the Morpheus token. Meanwhile, you still own the underlying principal asset. So let's say I take one ST ETH and I stake it to the contract. I still own that one ST ETH, but the yield that I would be accruing in Lido is actually going to the Morpheus protocol for protocol-owned liquidity. However, in return for that, you, in this case as the staker, receive your pro rata share of the Morpheus token emissions for capital providers based on your proportion of the total capital provided. In addition to this, you have the option to lock your rewards for a multiplier on what your proportional share is. Again, a technical aspect that I'll dive into in a later episode, but it's a really awesome fair launch mechanism because it allows individuals to earn more tokens through staking their ETH, but do so with what I perceive as a fairly limited amount of risk, especially, in the broader crypto space, because you still own your principal, your underlying Ethereum principal balance, which is really cool. And it's an amazing mechanism. I think that down the line, a lot of other projects will adopt this fair launch strategy. And in fact, I already know a couple that are looking into doing so. I mean, this is one of the first things that drew me in. The fourth category are builders. And so these are people who are building applications, smart agents, front-end apps, dApps, and other tools that actually are the demand drivers for the compute providers, back in that first bucket for compute. And this, we have a builder accelerator program that's going to be going live here, I believe, later this month, where builders who are building within the ecosystem can actually earn emissions from the protocol for doing so. And this creates a really interesting flywheel effect. A good example of this would be Venice AI, which is a front end built by Eric Voorhees and other contributors currently. It is an awesome application. Anyone who uses this definitely knows this, but if you haven't used it yet, I highly recommend you check it out. It's VENICE.ai, Venice.ai. And let's just say that you built Venice AI and you wanted to attract more token holders into using your project. You could actually, and again, I'm not saying that they're necessarily going to do this. This is just an example of what, a business or a builder could do. You could actually build a mechanism where your users purchase more tokens and they stake those more tokens to your project. So let's say I have 10 more tokens and I stake it to Venice, and Venice stakes those more tokens to the Morpheus protocol in order to receive a pro rata share of compute from the compute providers, which in this case would be sort of like the community of users propping up the cost of inference for the project to function and to exist. And at the same time, these projects that are building demand and building applications and smart agents and other things in the ecosystem can actually earn emissions from the ecosystem. So there's a potential flywheel effect where builders can build a product that individuals want to stake their more tokens to in order to receive the product or service, or maybe at some point it's a tokenized version of the product or service. And at the same time, them doing that is actually purchasing in a roundabout way the inference needed to operate the project, which is then earning emissions from the Morpheus network for the project developers. And so it really creates this awesome effect where there's supply and demand dynamics at play between the builders and compute buckets that allow the whole ecosystem to evolve and develop. So that was a general overview of the 4 buckets of the Morpheus network ecosystem. Again, I am not the most technical person in the world. And so to the best of my ability, I'm going to be sharing this information with you and keeping you up to date with what's going on in the community as the network and ecosystem continues to be built. I would definitely have individuals on in the form of interviews to talk with them further about some of the more technical aspects. And I really hope that Brainpower can become a platform that people can come back to and we can kind of learn and grow together in this space. The reality is it is so brand new and we are very much on the frontier of this entire thing being decentralized AI, not to mention the cryptocurrency component. And when you really throw the two technologies together, I genuinely believe in my core that we are seeing the development of the combination of two technologies that will literally change the course of human history. And I do not say that with exaggeration. I genuinely believe that to be the case. And so thank you for listening. I look forward to publishing future episodes of Brainpower and connecting with all of you on socials. Take care.